Alpha Lima Whiskey 301 Santo Domingo
A
coming.
Boeing 757 disappears
Alpha
from radar
Lima
with
Whiskey
189 people on
301
board.
Santo Domingo. Come
The
in,
plane's
please.
wreckage is soon found at sea. There are no survivors to say what happened.
This accident was the first major loss of a Boeing 757 aircraft.
Investigators find no clues in the wreckage. Only the plane's black box can tell them what happened. The tape raises a perplexing question.
301 Santo Domingo, come in, please.
My airspeed indicator is not working.
What's happening?
How had the failure of one single instrument caused the crash of one of the world's most sophisticated jetliners? Gregorio Luperon International Airport in Puerto Plata, the Dominican Republic. February the 6th, 1996. The small Caribbean island is a popular winter getaway. A group of German tourists has been delayed. There are mechanical problems with the jet that was supposed to take them back to Frankfurt. The airline has arranged to lease another plane for the flight. The replacement jet is owned by Turkish charter company Birgenair. They have a 757 that's been sitting on the tarmac for almost 3 weeks. But it takes several hours to get the plane ready to go, and to get the Turkish crew aboard. By 10:15 p.m., the plane and most of its crew are at the gate. More than 4 hours after they were supposed to take off, the first of the passengers begin boarding the plane. They have a 9-hour flight to Frankfurt ahead of them.
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301.
Shortly after 11:30, Birgenair Flight 301 is given permission to leave the gate.
Pushback granted.
Moments later, it taxis to the threshold of the runway.
Cabin crew, take your seats, ready for takeoff. Cabin announcement is completed. Exterior lights.
First Officer Aykut Gergin is new to the 757 with fewer than 75 hours in the plane.
Before
All in
takeoff
the last
checklist
3
completed.
months.
Thank you. Ready for takeoff.
In contrast, Captain Ahmet Erdem is one of Bergenair's most senior pilots. He's logged thousands of hours in this type of plane.
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, ready for takeoff.
301, cleared for takeoff, runway 08.
Cleared for takeoff. Runway 08, 301. Thank you. A good flight.
Good flight.
Good flight.
Mulis Evrenesolu is on this flight as a relief pilot. Like First Officer Gergin, he's been flying the 757 for less than 3 months. As the plane accelerates to takeoff speed, a light rain begins to fall.
Power set.
Okay, check.
First Officer Aykut Gergin watches his airspeed indicator for a routine instrument check.
As the airplane's accelerating to takeoff speed, the first officer calls 80 knots.
80 knots. Check.
The captain, in theory, should verify that his airspeed indicator also reads 80 knots.
My airspeed indicator is not working.
The captain's airspeed should read the same as his first officer's,
120.
but the readings do not match.
Is yours working?
Yes, sir.
You tell me.
Erdem wants his first officer to tell him when the plane hits takeoff speed.
V1.
At 150 knots, the plane hits V1, the point of no return.
Rotate.
The captain must pull back on his column and get the plane in the air.
Positive climb, gear up.
Positive climb. Gear is up.
At 11:42, the plane takes off. Seconds later, Captain Airdem's airspeed indicator comes to life.
Is it possible to turn off the wipers?
Okay. Wipers off.
Climb thrust.
Climb thrust.
First Officer Bergen reduces power to the engines for a gradual climb to cruising altitude.
301, Airborne 45, switch over Santo Domingo, 1243.
1243, bye-bye, sir.
Climbing through 2,500 feet,
Santo Domingo, good evening.
First Officer
Alpha Lima
Bergen
Whiskey
establishes
301,
contact
climbing
with the
with you.
island's main tower in Santo Domingo.
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, climb and maintain 280.
Center autopilot on, please.
Center autopilot, as command.
Thank you.
1 minute and 30 seconds into the flight, the autopilot takes over. Onboard computers now make all the calculations and adjustments necessary to keep the plane climbing safely. Almost immediately, the computer reports a problem.
Rudder ratio, Mach airspeed trim.
2 different alerts warn the pilots that the plane is traveling far too
Yes,
fast.
trim.
But the first officer's airspeed indicator shows the plane climbing at a normal speed, 220 knots.
Something's wrong here.
Unaware that there are any problems, the controller directs Birgenair Flight 301 to continue climbing.
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, report Pokek.
Okay, 280, I'll call you over Pokek. 301.
Okay, there's something crazy. Do you see it?
In the cockpit, the situation gets more confusing. The first officer's airspeed indicator shows that the plane is flying much too slowly.
Mine shows only 200 now, and decreasing, sir.
But the captain's gauge shows the plane flying far too fast, 325 knots.
Both of them are wrong. What can we do? Let's check the circuit breakers.
Yes, sir.
As the first warning is eliminated, a more persistent warning replaces it. The overspeed warning tells the crew that they are approaching 350 knots, the maximum speed at which the plane was designed to fly at this altitude.
Okay, it's no matter. Let's pull the airspeed. Let's see.
Resetting the circuit breakers turns off the alarm, but it doesn't fix the problem. Captain Airdem's airspeed indicator still shows he's flying much too fast.
Now it's 350, yes?
Confused by the conflicting information, Captain Airdem decides to do what the plane wants. He slows
Let's
down.
take that like this.
With terrifying results. The 757 is sending out warnings that are confusing the crew. Bewildered, the crew struggles to solve the problem. The lives of 189 people depend on them getting the answer right. Shortly after taking off from the Dominican Republic, Birgenair Flight 301 is in trouble. The cockpit is filled with an ominous sound, the stick shaker alert.
A stick shaker warning is a warning of imminent stall. It means that the airplane is about to attain a speed so low that it cannot sustain flight.
The alert is so serious that it actually shakes the pilot's control columns. Combined with a loud rattling, it's impossible to ignore. To add to the crew's confusion, confusion, the plane begins to vibrate and dip wildly.
I'm sure every passenger on the airplane knew something was unusual because the aircraft started to shake in a very violent maneuver.
It's not the only problem the crew is facing.
ADI!
The attitude deviation indicator is basically a round gauge that on this airplane is a screen, but it's blue on the top and brown on the bottom, and it shows not only the pitch of the airplane, but also roll.
On the gauge, blue represents sky. The more blue, the steeper the climb. Right now it's showing that the plane's nose is pointing dangerously high. Then, more than 7,000 feet above the ocean, the plane rolls hard to the right and begins to plummet from the sky.
From the time that the stick shaker activates, it is now going to require proper action from the flight crew to sort this out, or they will end up losing control of it. The window of decisions is closing on them, for if they let it stall completely, maintaining control of the airplane will prove to be very difficult.
Captain Airdem struggles desperately to get his plane to climb.
Nose down.
He has just a few thousand feet to pull a 100-ton airliner out of a deadly storm. The less experienced pilots utter prayers and offer suggestions.
Thrust. ADI.
301, squawk 377.
Stand by.
Air traffic control is still unaware that Flight 301 is in grave danger.
The timing. What am I to do? You can level off. Our altitude's okay.
The plane is falling fast.
Okay, 5,000 feet.
Captain Airdem is trying to fly a plane that's become virtually uncontrollable.
Press levers, fast!
Bergen pushes the throttles to full power, but it doesn't help. The plane spirals towards the surge.
What's happening?
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, Santo Domingo, come in, please. Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, Santo Domingo. Come in, please.
Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Birgenair Flight 301
Alpha Lima Whiskey
vanishes from
301.
radar.
Come in, please.
The Dominican Navy begins searching for the missing plane and its passengers.
En la ruta me imaginaba siempre que iba a, lo que me iba a encontrar. Pensaba que iba a encontrar gente gritando, gente llamando.
They discover something very different. The strong smell of jet fuel hangs over the water. Pieces of wreckage float on the waves.
Yo pensé dentro de mí, realmente no hay nadie sobreviviente aquí. No había sobrevivientes. Y no veíamos los cuerpos, pero pensé que el avión se había desintegrado realmente en el agua, con el golpe.
Within hours, more than just wreckage begins floating to the surface.
Hasta ese momento todavía no sentía como a eso de las 5:20 de la mañana, cuando los cuerpos comenzaron a salir. Sí, yo sentí un gran, en mi corazón sentí una honda pena realmente. Me sentí que no sabía si iba a sacar fuerza para poder hacer el trabajo en ese momento.
The search continues by the light of the next morning. American and Dominican rescue ships scour a 1,300 square kilometer area for survivors. None are found. Now it's up to the Dominican Republic's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau to find out what caused this accident.
Establecimos campamento en un hotel de la playa Cabarete, que estaba exactamente al sur de la posición del accidente.
Over the next couple of days, investigators, reporters, and some of the victims' families arrive at the hotel. Nearby, evidence of the disaster reaches the Dominican shores. Wreckage and passengers' possessions are washing up on the beach. Even the smallest piece could be a valuable clue as to what caused the crash. The USA's National Transportation Safety Board agrees to assist the Dominicans with their investigation.
Welcome to Dominican Republic. I'm Manuel Sufron.
They send an investigator to Puerto Plata.
We could see that this was going to take some international cooperation to get to the bottom of the event.
Robert McIntosh will also provide support from the NTSB's Washington offices.
Any signal from the recorders?
This particular accident was the first major loss of a Boeing 757 in the water. There was added urgency because the aircraft was going into the livery of many American-operated airlines and on the market for the worldwide passenger service.
In order to understand what had happened here, we only had one key. That key was the black boxes.
Like all commercial airliners, the Boeing 757 carries a cockpit voice recorder that records all the sounds in the cockpit, and a flight data recorder that records a wealth of information about the plane's operation during flight.
We've got underwater locator beacons on these recorders. They work for 30 days upon immersion.
But the ocean where the plane crashed is over 7,200 feet deep.
Necesitábamos localizarla
We
antes de
needed
que
to locate them
los
before the
localizadores
signals
se
faded,
apagaran.
and we also
Y luego
needed to remove
necesitábamos
them
sacarla
before
antes
the
de que los
data was
datos se
damaged by
dañaran
salt water.
por efecto
So we
del
were
agua
in
de
a
sal.
race against time.
Entonces estábamos en una carrera contra el tiempo.
The NTSB enlists the help of the US Navy, who hire a submersible called the Curve.
CURV stands for the Cabled Underwater Recovery Vehicle. It's a tethered vehicle. It has an umbilical, and it's controlled by an umbilical. It's not autonomous.
The Curve is essentially a remote-controlled submarine, which can work at depths no manned submarine could handle. While the Curve travels from the United States, Major Souffrant starts to examine the evidence he has. Radar on the ground tracked the plane as it climbed into the night sky.
And then I have the radar. The history of the flight is recorded here. So basically,
investigators study the radar records, along with the conversation between the ground controllers and the crew.
I have the recording from the control tower.
Santo Domingo, good evening. Alpha Lima Whiskey 301 climbing with you.
Alpha Lima Whiskey 301, climb and maintain 280.
Okay, 280.
The exchange between the controller and Flight 301 is normal. The investigators detect no signs of trouble.
Y la última comunicación entre ellos solamente se cortó por un espere un momento.
301, squawk 377.
Stand by.
As you heard, there's no reason why this plane went down.
What had caused something to go wrong to interrupt the flight path of the aircraft so rapidly? Certainly, it was a good question for us.
Any debris that's found is taken to a Dominican military base to be examined. Investigators comb through the wreckage they've recovered. Pieces of the cabin, life vests, even part of the landing gear have all been found. Every piece of debris is studied for signs of an explosion or fire. Investigators also check if any of the life vests are inflated. That would suggest passengers had some warning before the plane plowed into the sea. Cords on some of the life vests are hanging loose, but investigators conclude that could be the result of the plane's violent impact. The crash was so powerful, it has compressed coffee cans into flat pieces of tin. The wreckage tells investigators that the crash of Birgenair Flight 301 was sudden and violent. But they find no evidence that there was an explosion on board. Major Souffrant looks into the possibility that the plane, which was called into service at the last minute, may not have been ready for the flight.
Manuel Souffrant.
Hi.
I'd like to see some records of the Birgenair plane.
Oh, they're right here. This is it.
It had been on the ground for some time in Puerto Plata, and that became interesting to us. Why would an operating company have an aircraft sitting there?
Investigators discover that the plane wasn't on the ground for repairs. Based on maintenance records, the plane appears to have been mechanically sound. Bergenair simply didn't have enough passengers to justify the flight financially. So they kept the plane and the crew in the Dominican Republic for almost 3 weeks. The plane's maintenance records turn out to be one more in a series of empty leads. The Curve arrives in Puerto Plata harbor. On February the 28th, more than 3 weeks after the crash, it slips below the waves, looking for the remains of the Bergenair jet. It takes the robotic submarine 2 hours just to descend the 7,200 feet to the ocean floor. From there, it sends back images of the wreck of Flight 301.
The cockpit pretty much was sitting upright, and it was pretty much the nose of the plane, and you could see the front part of it. It was obviously banged up and cracked and fragmented.
The clues investigators need to solve the mystery of this plane crash lie somewhere amongst the plane's twisted wreckage. The flight's black boxes are the top priority. The Curve quickly picks up the signal from a pinger on one of the units. Operators must now maneuver the sub towards the sound. They have to be able to see the boxes to pick them up with the robotic arm. It takes just 90 minutes to find the first black box.
The first one was sitting out in the open. Okay, it was where they could see it, and they picked the first box up. They grabbed a hold of it, and they just kind of tucked the arm up in place, so that they wouldn't lose it.
The second black box is also heard, but after almost 2 hours, the Curve's cameras still can't see it.
They knew it was right there, and they were searching around a debris pile, and they could not physically see it, with the cameras of the vehicle. So as they went around a couple times, they started, lifting metal up and moving pieces out of the way, and then they did find the second box under some debris.
Flight 301's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are brought to the surface and loaded onto a waiting jet. Within hours, the black boxes are at the NTSB labs in Washington, D.C. Technicians prepare to extract the precious data from the boxes. Investigators hope it will tell them what happened aboard Birgenair Flight 301. They'll soon uncover a stunning miscommunication between a seasoned pilot and his plane. To unravel the mystery of Birgenair Flight 301, investigators are counting on the plane's black boxes.
That flight data recorder was our key. So the technicians got busy and gave us plots, visual plots of what was going on with engines and airspeeds and so on, to allow us to try and understand why that aircraft slowed down and then simply departed controlled flight and entered the ocean.
Ah, that's great. That shows us all we need to see for now. So it's all the flight data recording. It's on a timeline,
top is the pitch. We've got the airspeed and the altitude. But check out the timeline, 44.
Investigators immediately notice something unusual about the flight.
15 degrees pitch, nose up. Seems high.
It's almost the maximum.
And then it stays that way.
The plane began climbing normally.
Center Autopilot on, please.
But investigators noticed that shortly after the autopilot was switched on, the plane's nose pitched upward. They also see that the plane's airspeed seems much higher than it should be.
350 knots. It can't be right.
Oh, there's definitely something wonky about the airspeed numbers.
This brought us to the question of perhaps we should be looking over on the other side at the cockpit voice recorder and see what kind of information was coming from there.
Can you cue that up and play it?
Investigators soon start filling in the missing pieces of the puzzle.
80 knots?
My airspeed indicator is not working.
They learn that Captain Erdem noticed that his airspeed indicator wasn't working.
Fuel's working? Yes, sir.
You tell me.
V1. Rotate.
But Erdem didn't think the problem was serious enough to abort his takeoff. The tape reveals that once they were airborne, the crew quickly became overwhelmed by a series of warnings.
Rudder ratio, Mach airspeed trim, something
to investigators, the captain seems to become increasingly bewildered by the messages he was getting from his plane.
Mine shows only 200 now, and decreasing, sir.
Both of them are wrong. What can we do?
Investigators don't know why the captain's airspeed indicator wasn't working. They do notice that the captain's gauge came back to life as the plane started to climb.
Okay, it's no matter. Let's pull the airspeed. Let's see.
It's a telling discovery, which leads investigators to focus their attention on the device that feeds the gauge's airspeed information. The Pitot tube. A Pitot tube is an airspeed sensor. A pipe open at one end that responds to air pressure. When the plane travels forward, an increase in air pressure inside the Pitot tube causes the airspeed indicator's needle to move.
My airspeed indicator is not working.
But if a Pitot tube becomes blocked, it can send faulty readings to the plane's gauges. Blocked Pitot tubes have been a factor in previous plane crashes. In 1982, a Boeing 737 crashed in heavy snow in Washington, D.C. shortly after takeoff. The Pitot tubes were blocked with ice. Investigators suspect that the Pitot tube which fed the captain's airspeed indicator on the Bergenair jet was somehow blocked. But they know ice can't have blocked the tubes of a plane taking off from a Caribbean island.
We don't know why it was blocked, but it presented a very, very interesting situation to us. We started carefully looking at what could cause that kind of thing to happen.
Senor!
Major Souffrant has a theory. He returns to question the airplane's mechanics.
Senor Souffrant.
We are done with this, thank you. I'd like to ask you some more questions about the Birgenair plane.
Souffrant suspects that mechanics may have taped over the Pitot tubes during maintenance. It's a common procedure, but if the tape wasn't removed, it could have caused the deadly accident.
Maybe a piece of tape was left on accidentally?
No, sir. They didn't have to be taped. We never did anything with the Pitos.
Did you put the Pitot covers back on them when the maintenance was finished?
It didn't have any covers with it. We didn't take any off, and we didn't put any on.
Y es ahí donde encontramos que los Pitot nunca estuvieron cubiertos en los 25 días que duró la aeronave en la rampa del Aeropuerto Internacional de Puerto Plata.
A Pitot cover slips over the end of the tube. Regulations state that these covers must be installed anytime a plane will be on the ground for an extended period of time. A prominent flag is meant to remind pilots and technicians to remove them again before takeoff. Investigators find that the Birgenair Pitot tubes were never covered, and somehow the uncovered Pitots had become blocked. Recovering the tube from the ocean floor is the only way for investigators to answer a pressing question. What blocked the Pitot tubes?
Nobody knows for sure. The evidence is 7,000 feet down in the Atlantic Ocean.
But even if the Pitot tubes were blocked, how could it have caused the crash of a modern jet and the death of 189 people?
It's not like a car where you have only one speedometer. In this kind of an aircraft, you have a total of 3 airspeed indicators, and there's a flight data computer which is computing the velocity in relation to the ground.
I'd like to welcome you all this afternoon. As you know, I'm Bob McIntosh.
Using information from the black boxes, the NTSB pieces together a real-time animation from liftoff to the final moments of Flight 301.
This is the indicator. The captain actually realized that his speed indicator was not working.
Is yours working?
Yes, sir.
The big question for investigators is how could one faulty airspeed source result in a crash?
He realized it at a time when he could have aborted, he could have turned back, but he chose to continue. Right now,
investigators analyze the captain's every move and find that he allowed a small error to escalate and ultimately overwhelm him.
Rotate. Positive climb, gear up.
Moments after liftoff, Captain Erdem's airspeed indicator appears to be working.
And then that means it's at odds.
But investigators suspect the gauge is responding to changes in altitude.
Climb thrust.
As the plane climbs through the thinning atmosphere, the air trapped inside the tube expands, causing a buildup of pressure. Inside the cockpit, this causes the airspeed indicator needle to deflect. Even though altitude is causing the increase in pressure, the sensors mistakenly read it as an increase in airspeed.
So at this point, the takeoff is standard, nothing's...
Captain Erdem may have had 5 separate sources of airspeed to rely on, but investigators noticed that when the trouble started, he wasn't flying the plane.
Center autopilot on, please.
Center autopilot has command.
Thank you.
The autopilot was. And unless the crew reconfigures it, the autopilot gets its airspeed information from only one source.
Remember, the autopilot gets its data only from the captain's Pitot tube, the one that was blocked.
The data shows that the trouble on Birgenair Flight 301 began when the autopilot took over.
Right after the autopilot is engaged, the plane's nose begins to rise.
Investigators suspect that the crew didn't realize that the blocked Pitot tube was feeding the autopilot faulty information. The computer registered that the plane was traveling too fast and raised the nose to slow it down.
It soon rises to 15 degrees, then it stays there.
Raising the nose works like an air brake. It slows the plane by creating drag. The autopilot is programmed to never bring the nose higher than about 15 degrees. Any higher, and the plane would slow down too much and stall.
The autopilot's a pretty smart guy. He already knows he's got all the power that he's going to get for the climb. The only thing for the autopilot to do is raise the nose. And it raised the nose of the airplane to its limits of authority.
But the autopilot was reacting to faulty information. Moments later, it sent out 2 different warnings.
Rudder ratio, Mach airspeed trim.
That the plane was traveling too fast to be controlled safely.
And the airplane begins picking up warnings, rudder ratio, a variety of things that the airplane is sensing problems.
Okay, there's something crazy here. Do you see it?
Yes, there is something crazy. Mine shows only 200 now, and decreasing, sir.
Both of them are wrong.
Investigators realized that Captain Erdem wrongly concluded that both airspeed indicators were malfunctioning. In fact, his first officer's gauge was always correct. The plane was traveling much too slowly.
What can we do?
Captain Erdem no longer knows which instruments to trust.
Let's check the circuit breakers.
As they saw these caution lights, they decided they were going to start pulling some circuit breakers. That would be rather strange.
The actions of trying to reset circuit breakers is something that pilots of older generations aircraft have learned via experience of sometimes being able to get an errant system back functional.
Resetting the circuit breakers turns off the alarm.
But that needle continued to climb around the clock face until it activated the overspeed warning.
The autopilot system sent yet another warning that the plane was traveling too fast. But the reality was just the opposite. The plane was slowing down.
At this point, the overspeed indicator is on. They're going slow, they think they're going too fast, and confusion is set in.
Let's pull the airspeed.
That's when Captain Erdem made the gravest error of all.
You can see that he now pulls back on his throttles.
Investigators realized that at the plane's already slow speed, pulling back on the throttles was disastrous. The crew got the most severe warning that a plane can send out.
And that's when he gets the stick shift.
He's got a tactile sense coming through his flight controls that literally shakes the stick and says, "You've got to lower this nose."
In a matter of seconds, Captain Erdem was first warned that his plane was traveling too fast, and then that it was traveling dangerously slowly.
They're in direct opposition of each other, and two warnings that you would never expect to get one right behind the other.
The autopilot is programmed to always disconnect when the stick shaker activates. It's up to the pilot to get the plane out of the stall.
Once the autopilot reached its limits of authority, it said, "I've done all I can do. I'm out of here."
When the autopilot disengaged, Captain Erdem suddenly found himself in control of the plane at the moment of his greatest confusion.
If you watch the plane at the top of the screen,
the cockpit recordings lead investigators to a stunning conclusion.
ADI!
Captain Erdem may not have recognized that his plane is about to stall, but the relief pilot behind him did.
ADI!
This additional pilot intervened to say, "ADI, ADI." In other words, look at that ADI and put yourself where you would normally see the nose of the aircraft. 5 degrees nose high, 10 degrees.
So when the reserve pilot says ADI, he is attempting to focus the captain's attention to roll and pitch, which are becoming problematic.
The relief pilot wanted Captain Erdem to recognize that the plane's nose was pitched dangerously skyward. Investigators can hear First Officer Bergen trying to convey the same message.
Nose down.
At this point, the first officer is actually trying to lead the captain to some solutions, but not actually take control of the airplane.
What the 757 desperately needed was airflow over the wings to generate lift. The only way to get that was to point the nose down and dive. What puzzles investigators is that the first officer had a control column identical to the captain's. He could have pushed it and brought the nose down himself. He may have been able to save the plane. But he didn't. Instead, he and the other Turkish crew member continued offering suggestions to their more experienced but overwhelmed captain.
But climbing, what am I to do? You can level off, our altitude's okay.
The recording shows that Captain Erdem ignored valuable advice that could have saved the plane.
And in the Birgenair case, there's a case of a relatively junior first officer looking at one of the most senior captains on the airline. It is not culturally appropriate for him to say, "I'm going to take the airplane away from you." Instead, he tries to assist the captain, to lead the captain, but leave the captain in command. Other cultures, other training, other airlines may very well have required the first officer to physically take control of the airplane.
I think the social atmosphere in the cockpit will prevail to revere age and experience to the point where it can kill somebody. And in this case, it looks like it did.
The flight data recorder reveals that instead of pushing the nose down, Captain Erdem tried to get more speed from his engines.
At this point, the crew goes to full power.
Thrust levers, thrust!
At the angle the plane was falling, the engines couldn't get enough air. Applying full power was more than they could handle. The left engine quit first.
In a state of utter confusion.
With the right side at full throttle, the airliner swings around as though its left wing were caught on a branch.
The airplane goes into a classic full stall where the nose drops, it falls on a wing, which is now a very life-threatening condition.
The 757 itself makes the situation worse. Like many modern jets, it uses a so-called swept wing design. The wings angle slightly backwards to reduce drag and increase fuel efficiency. But the design has a downside.
One of the characteristics of swept-wing jets is they get less and less stable. They're much harder to fly as they approach stall.
Sir, pull up! What's happening? What's happening?
To maintain control of a swept-wing jet with no more altitude than they had in this condition is very, very problematic, and they are not successful when the airplane goes into the water.
Investigators now know why Birgenair Flight 301 crashed.
Okay, check.
What they can't understand is why the flight ever left the ground.
80 knots. My airspeed indicator's not working.
At 80 knots, if the pilot and co-pilot's instruments disagree, takeoff should be aborted.
V1.
Investigators are troubled that the captain took off knowing he had malfunctioning instruments.
Y si algo no está funcionando
If something
correctamente,
is not
no
functioning
importa
correctly,
qué,
it doesn't matter
la
what it
acción a tomar
is,
es
one should
abortar el
abort the
despegue
takeoff at 80 knots.
en los 80 nudos.
This decision on the part of the captain has been criticized, but there is a very short time window for this decision to be made.
Members of the investigative team in Puerto Plata try to find any clues that might explain why Captain Erdem didn't abort his takeoff. It was raining that night. Perhaps he was worried that he wouldn't be able to stop his speeding plane in time.
Procedurally, he's required to stop, but high-speed aborted takeoffs are something that are very serious, and that flight crews train to avoid high-speed aborted takeoffs if possible.
And we certainly looked at the parameters of the runway to ensure that there was adequate runway in that particular situation.
Careful measurements are taken. Investigators conclude that at 80 knots, when he first noticed the problem, Captain Erdem had enough runway left to bring his plane to a stop. He could have aborted his takeoff. There's also the question of the hastily assembled crew. Investigators now wonder if the last-minute nature of the crew's call could have influenced their decision to take off.
Bergenair started with a crew that probably didn't expect to fly that night. They didn't have adequate rest. They got out to the aircraft and perhaps were rushed in some of their planning.
Investigators consider the possibility that the crew, who had been away from home for more than 2 weeks, were simply too eager to get home.
08301, thank you. A good flight. Good flight. Good flight.
Y ahí viene el factor del homesick, la
This is the
enfermedad de
homesick
regreso a
factor,
casa,
where minor
donde
problems are
los problemas
ignored in order to
menores
get back
son
home.
obviados para seguir el vuelo y llegar a la casa.
Investigators will never know what was going through Captain Erdem's mind when he opted to continue his takeoff.
In this case, the airplane is accelerating rapidly enough. The first officer responds,
V1.
which is the commit to fly speed, and by training, now the decision window has closed. They need to fly.
Rotate.
And immediately thereafter, they're airborne.
Once the plane was in the air, its blocked pitot tubes caused Captain Erdem to make a series of critical mistakes. But how were the tubes blocked in the first place? Investigators will find that the deaths of 189 people was caused by something the size of a paperclip. Investigators now know that a blocked pitot tube led to a series of conflicting warnings that confounded Flight 301's captain. Now they want to know how those same warnings would affect other pilots.
Fuimos a un simulador de vuelo.
We went to a flight simulator,
and
in the
tratamos de
simulator, we tried to recreate the
la misma
conditions of what
situación que
happened
se
on the
dio
night of February 6th,
aquella noche del 6 de febrero de 1996.
Gentlemen, stand by.
The simulator showed investigators that an overspeed warning, followed by a stick shaker warning, caused even the most seasoned pilots to freeze. The contradictory warnings were potentially dangerous.
When the stick shaker activated, it was very unnerving. It's really overwhelming.
That would tell me that Mach airspeed warning horn, combined with a stick shaker, was a tremendously mind-boggling experience to a line pilot.
As a result, the FAA issues a directive that simulator training for all airline pilots must include a blocked pitot tube scenario.
The flight crew within Birgenair was faced with a large number of warnings that kept coming, and each warning added complexity to the environment. There's a lot of warning lights going off. This captain is in a condition that is deteriorating now very rapidly. So there is a dramatically increased demand on the captain to fly the airplane.
The FAA asks Boeing to change some of those warnings. Those changes include the addition of a new warning, which tells both pilots that their instruments disagree, and the ability for pilots to more easily silence troublesome alarms. Finally, Boeing modifies its planes so that pilots can easily choose which pitot tube the autopilot is using for airspeed readings. All told, more than 1,400 Boeing planes worldwide are affected by the new directives. One final question remains. What had blocked the plane's pitot tubes? Investigators conduct an extensive search for Birgenair Flight 301's pitot tubes. They are never found. But at Puerto Plata's airport, they don't have to look far to find the likeliest suspect. It's not ice, and it's not dirt.
We know that the area around Puerto Plata has a lot of bees and wasps and animals and birds and insects that like to build nests.
One of the insects is well known to pilots flying out of the Dominican Republic. It's called the mud dauber wasp. Bug experts tell investigators about an extraordinary connection between the wasps and a pitot tube.
Cuando la avipa albañilera está buscando un área para construir su nido, está buscando por un sitio, un lugar más o menos que tenga algo tubular. Cuando las avispas albañileras construyen sus nidos de barro, el barro cuando se seca o la arcilla se endurece y se compacta, es dura.
Mud dauber wasps are squatters that make their nests in available places, like crevices in homes, or even the pitot tubes of planes.
La razón del que el avión estuviera tanto día parado en el aeropuerto, 25 días, es suficiente tiempo para cualquier especie de las avispas albañileras construir su nido en los pitot tubes.
Investigators can only conclude that mud dauber wasps blocked the uncovered pitot tubes that fed the captain's airspeed indicator, which caused it to malfunction.
They didn't put covers on the pitot tubes. So at some point in time, extended time, there was an opportunity to get something like a mud dauber in that pitot tube.
Investigators have their answer. On February the 6th, 1996, a tiny insect led to a series of mistakes that brought down an airplane and changed the design of the world's most successful series of airliners. 639 pieces of wreckage are recovered from the sea. 639 pieces that only deepen the mystery of a deadly plane crash.
All right, a little bit more to the right. There.
But when investigators bring up the 640th piece of China Airlines Flight 611, they get their answer.
There was definitely a eureka moment on the dock.
It would be scrutinized more closely than any other piece of debris. On this single piece of wreckage, investigators would find the one clue that would tell them why a modern jetliner with 225 people on board shattered in mid-air.
Feet. Speed is low, sir. Watch it. Did you feel that?
Target control, descend and maintain. Echo Foxtrot, 126.
May the 25th, 2002.
Gears up.
A China Airlines 747 lifts off from Taiwan's capital, Taipei.
Taipei approach, Dynasty 611, airborne passing 1,600.
Dynasty 611, Taipei approach radar, contact climb and maintain flight level 260.
260, Dynasty 611. Autopilot B, engage.
China Airlines is Taiwan's national airline. There are 225 people on board Flight 611. Today's flight is a short one, 1 hour and 40 minutes across the Taiwan Strait to Hong Kong. This route is one of the most widely traveled on the planet. It makes so much money, it's called the Golden Route.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fasten seatbelt sign has been turned off. For your safety, we do recommend that you keep your seatbelt fastened at all times while seated.
Minutes after taking off, Flight 611 climbs steadily above the Taiwan Strait. The plane's autopilot controls the ascent. And then, 20 minutes after taking off, at an altitude of almost 35,000 feet, at Taipei Area Control, the flight vanishes from radar.
Dynasty 611, Taipei. Dynasty 611, Taipei. I've got a plane off radar. China Airlines 611. Its last known return was east 119.67, north 23.98.
Taiwanese authorities quickly launch one of the largest rescue missions in that country's aviation history.
本时段备勤同仁，本时段备勤同仁，请立即至值班室集合。科研麻，你帮我。海顺动幺，海顺动幺，呼叫美方动幺，听到请回答。
我是同时下达。
I gave a clear order that the priority would be searching for whoever was still alive, then bodies, and then only then wreckage.
More than 1,000 people take part. Fishing boats, the Coast Guard, and Taiwan's military race out to sea. Flight 611 was 55 kilometers from the Taiwanese shore, just north of the Penghu Islands, when it disappeared. Rescuers find debris floating in the Taiwan Strait.
The first thing we saw was a great amount of wreckage, including landing gear wheels, napkins, knives, and forks.
Wreckage from the plane is spread far and wide. Some items are found on land more than 100 kilometers away in central Taiwan. As the rescue effort continues, Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council begins its investigation into the crash of the 22-year-old plane.
747-200, delivered August 2nd, 1979.
Kay Young is the managing director of the ASC. He'll be leading the investigation.
We're setting up a command post in Penghu Island. Let's go.
China Airlines have had very, very poor safety record. As a matter of fact, it was considered one of the worst in the world. Typically, it had like one major accident every 4 years. This particular investigation was by far the most difficult one. And one of the reasons why was it's in the ocean floor.
The search for survivors goes on around the clock. There were 225 people on the airplane. Nobody is found alive. The bodies are taken to the Penghu Islands to be identified and examined. Since the accident involved an American-made plane, the NTSB joins the investigation. A team of investigators is dispatched to Taiwan. They'll be led by John DeLisi in Washington.
We have a very good working relationship with the ASC, the Aviation Safety Council of Taiwan, so we knew that they would ask for and welcome our assistance in the investigation.
Wreckage that's found floating is also brought to the Penghu Islands. Investigators need to know how one of the world's most successful planes, on one of the world's most traveled routes, simply fell out of the sky.
Well, the Boeing 747 is the world's most popular jumbo jet, and it's flown millions of people, probably billions of miles. We were very concerned.
Good morning. I'm anxious to see what you have.
Sophisticated ground-based radar tracked Flight 611 throughout its short journey. It should provide investigators with a much clearer picture of the flight than the radar at air traffic control. Kay Young gets the first major clue in this case. The radar tracked the plane as it climbed on course to 35,000 feet. Then suddenly, Flight 611's signal split apart.
The breakup is quite graphic.
Right when the event happened, it appeared as if there were 3 or 4 sizable pieces of wreckage that were getting radar returns that then began to drift and scatter as they fell to the earth. So that told us that the airplane broke up in flight.
Investigators now must turn their attention to finding out what caused that breakup.
There's all kind of theories about, what seems to be happening of that particular aircraft.
We knew that something massive had happened suddenly, without warning.
It doesn't take long for the media to consider a sinister possibility. that Flight 611 was shot down. China and Taiwan have a combative relationship. China has fired missiles towards Taiwan in the past. There's suspicion in the media that China shot down Flight 611.
There were a lot of theories about, it was shooting down by enemy fire.
Only 8 months earlier, a Siberia Airlines flight with 78 people on board was shot down over the Black Sea. It was accidentally hit by a missile fired from Ukraine during a training exercise. On the day of the China Airlines crash, China was conducting military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. But officials there insist no missile was launched towards Flight 611. None of the wreckage recovered so far has any of the telltale signs of being hit. And there's no evidence on radar that there was ever a missile heading for Flight 611.
Once the evidence began to come in, it very quickly ruled out a missile, much the same way that it ruled out it being a mid-air collision. There were no other objects in the air near the airplane.
Few things would cause a plane to break up in mid-air. One of the big ones is a bomb. Medical examiners check the bodies that have been recovered for burn marks and shrapnel. They find none. The plane's metal skin would be torn and curled in a very particular way if there had been a bomb on board. Investigators find no such damage on any of the pieces. But to rule out a bomb, they'll have to find more wreckage.
I think that'll be it for floating wreckage.
The team from the NTSB arrives in Taiwan.
Morning, I'm Clint Crookshanks from the NTSB. Hello.
Good to see you, gentlemen. I'm afraid we still don't have much.
Clint Crookshanks is a structural engineer who knows the 747 intimately.
I didn't have any preconceived notions. This was my first major accident working for the NTSB.
We are not getting much from the floating debris. In-flight breakout. That's all we know.
Taiwan's Civil Aeronautics Authority doesn't take any chances. They ground all of China Airlines 747-200 series planes until they can be inspected for mechanical flaws. This puts added pressure on investigators to find out what happened.
Thank you for bringing these.
To the NTSB, this accident seems to have a lot in common with one of the world's most studied plane crashes. That of TWA Flight 800, 6 years earlier. Like the China Airlines flight, it broke into pieces while still climbing. That plane crashed into the Atlantic shortly after taking off from New York.
TWA Flight 800 was the biggest investigation the NTSB has ever done. Lasted about 4 years.
The painstaking investigation uncovered a design flaw with the 747. Wiring near one of the plane's fuel tanks could spark and ignite the fuel in the tank. Investigators conclude that's what likely caused the crash. Investigators are struck by similarities between the two flights. Both were 747s. Both disintegrated without warning while still climbing. Both flights took off in very hot weather. The heat may have caused Flight 800 to explode. That plane sat on the tarmac with its air conditioning running. Investigators believe hot air from the air conditioner overheated the plane's fuel. The early evidence is pointing to a repeat of TWA Flight 800.
So it looks really very, very similar. So therefore, our immediate focus was essentially the central fuel tank.
3 weeks after the crash, the Jan Steen, a sophisticated salvage vessel, arrives in the Taiwan Strait. It's equipped with divers, a diving chamber, and a remote-operated submarine, complete with sonar and video cameras.
The NTSB were tasked with manning the recovery vessel and watching video screens from the ROV.
Using sonar, investigators have located the wreckage of Flight 611 deep underwater.
All right, to the right a bit.
Clint Cruikshanks knows all the pieces that make up a 747, but he's never seen them like this.
It was really quite a shock when I first saw pieces on the floor of the ocean. With only the lighting of the ROV to guide you, you would notice something that looked like an airplane part. The ROV would then circle around the part, looking at it from all angles.
Cruikshank's job is to help the Taiwanese identify specific airplane parts among the wreckage.
I think it takes a different kind of mind to be able to look at a mangled part and kind of straighten it out in your head to really determine where it comes from on the airplane.
All right, a little bit more to the right. All right, go back. There, okay, that's definitely a piece of wing. Let's mark it.
Once a piece is identified, its GPS coordinates get recorded. The GPS mapping tells investigators that the debris is spread out over 325 square kilometers. It will be difficult to track down specific pieces of the plane. 25 days after the crash of Flight 611, the plane's 2 black boxes have been found. One contains voice recordings of conversations in the cockpit. The other, data from the plane's flight computer. Either could hold the clues that will reveal what happened during the final minutes of the flight. If the answer is on the tape, investigators may not have to bring up more wreckage to the surface. The data is critical.
Everybody ready?
Investigators begin with the plane's cockpit voice recorder. They hope that the pilots will have said something to each other about an emergency on board.
Welcome aboard, China Airlines.
The recording begins about 10 minutes before the plane took off.
20.
Preparations for the flight sound normal.
Okay, after start checklist.
After start, anti-ice.
The crew checks all their systems and runs through standard checklists.
Off. Off.
It was very, very experienced crew. Both the captain and the flight and first officers were quite seasoned.
Dynasty 611, runway 06, wind 050 at 9 are cleared for takeoff.
Clear for takeoff, Dynasty 611.
Takeoff.
'80.
Check.
V1. Rotate.
Flap 5.
1 green. Okay, flap up.
Investigators listen to more than conversations. They also want to hear if the plane itself was making any unusual sounds.
Noises on the cockpit voice recorder can either be audible spoken words that are recorded by a microphone, or they can be structural discrepancies that are picked up by the microphone.
Highway control, descend.
If anything, though, this cockpit is unusually quiet.
Unit Air 608, reduce speed 210 knots.
The captain seems relaxed.
200 knots, roger. Unit Airway 608.
The microphones pick up the sound of controllers talking to other planes.
Trans Asia 536, fly heading 050.
Heading 050.
In the moments before the disaster, nothing seems wrong. There are no unusual sounds.
Now descend and maintain 250.
The final words spoken in the cockpit are from Captain Yi Ching Feng.
2000.
He calls out the distance to their cruising altitude. That's followed by the sound of a chime, alerting the crew that they're nearing 35,000 feet. And then the cockpit microphone picks up the sound of the plane breaking apart. Half a second later, the recording stops.
The cockpit voice recorder indicated that the conversation of the cockpit crew were totally normal, and all of a sudden just died.
The recorders told us that something happened, but it wasn't enough to tell us exactly what it was yet. Many things had been ruled out by then, but we didn't have the golden nugget. We didn't have the real piece of evidence that told us what initiated the breakup of this 747.
After the disappointment of the voice recorder, studying the wreckage becomes the only option for investigators. They focus their efforts on items that can either prove or disprove the link to TWA Flight 800.
So we play a lot of focus on the wreckage observation and examination of the central fuel tank.
On July the 12th, 48 days after the crash.
Okay, whoa. A little to the left, please.
Success.
All right. That's definitely the central fuel tank. Okay, let's mark that. Let's bring that up.
The tank joins the sea of wreckage piling up at the pier. Investigators study it closely for any evidence that it exploded. If it did explode like the TWA tank, it would be curled and twisted. And the metal would be bent outwards. But this fuel tank is different.
And we found the central fuel tank was relatively intact.
And it's crumpled inwards. Unlike the tank from the TWA flight, there's no soot. There would be if the jet fuel inside had ignited.
So at that time, we pretty much ruled out it was the cause of the central fuel tank.
The wreckage recovered so far has also forced investigators to abandon another theory, that a bomb brought down the plane.
None of the wreckage showed any evidence of sooting, any kind of explosive damage.
The China Airlines crash was neither a repeat of TWA Flight 800, nor a deliberate bombing. Investigators are running out of leads. As more wreckage is identified and recovered, investigators find an intriguing clue. It's discovered when they examine a series of small vents from Flight 611. All commercial jetliners have dozens of these vents near the floor. They're essentially pressure release valves. They're called dado panels, and there's only one reason for them to open. If the cargo area underneath the passengers were to suddenly decompress, the pressurized air above would exert so much force on the floor that it could collapse and damage vital flight controls. That's precisely what happened to a Turkish Airlines flight in 1974. The pilots couldn't control their plane after their cargo door blew out.
We've lost it!
If the floor on that flight hadn't collapsed, the pilots may have been able to save the plane. After that accident, the NTSB recommended that manufacturers install many more relief vents between a passenger plane's upper and lower levels. If there is decompression in the cargo area, the dado panels open automatically and release the pressure on the floor. There were 65 dado panels on the China Airlines flight. 19 of them were recovered from the ocean. 4 recovered panels were in the open position. It tells investigators that there must have been a sudden loss of pressure beneath the passenger cabin. But it doesn't tell them what caused it. The dado panels lead investigators closer to solving the mystery of this crash. But it's just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. There are hundreds of pieces of wreckage to be examined for clues. Kay Young now wonders if a few of those pieces might be able to tell him where the decompression originated.
I've been reading about the trajectory analysis you did on Flight 800. I'd like to try it.
Ballistic trajectory analysis is a technique that US investigators used to figure out how TWA Flight 800 disintegrated. It's impossible to do without specialized computers.
We figure that because it disintegrated in the midair, the ballistic analysis from which the NTSB did in TWA 800 could be very, very useful to us, to help us to analyze the trajectory of the flying debris.
The analysis is based on a simple fact. The pieces that came off the plane first would be the first to hit the water. If investigators can figure out which pieces those were, they'll know where the trouble began. Radar that had been tracking the plane as it climbed also ended up tracking pieces of debris as they fell. The salvage workers have recorded the precise location of those same pieces of wreckage. Their logs could match a specific piece to its radar track. Investigators know the wind speed on the day of the crash, and they can obtain precise information about ocean currents. The last piece of the puzzle comes from the plane's flight data recorder, the plane's altitude, speed, and direction at the time of the breakup. As they're brought to the dock, every single piece of wreckage has been logged and numbered for identification.
327.
Kay Young selects 18 pieces of wreckage for the computer analysis. Some from the front, some from the middle, and some from the back of the plane.
199.
Along with all the other data, he'll feed information about each item's weight and shape into the computer.
526.
Based on where the pieces fell, the computer should be able to calculate which of those 18 pieces was the first to come off the plane.
Can we see when each one of those items separated from the aircraft?
All of the data paints a telling picture of what happened at 35,000 feet. Kay Young gets to see how Flight 611 broke up, from beginning to end.
The tail came off first.
Along with the dado panels, it's a very important clue.
Well, that pretty much indicating that there's something happened in the back of the aircraft, rather than something happened in the forward part.
Investigators are now keen to recover items from the rear of the plane. Hundreds of pieces of wreckage are piling up at the pier on the Penghu Islands. The NTSB sends metallurgist Frank Zakar to Taiwan to examine the wreckage.
I was walking along the yard where the wreckage was placed, and at that time I walked up to item 640 and noticed that there were some peculiar areas of interest that I wanted to look at a little bit further.
With this battered piece of metal, investigators have struck gold.
There was definitely a eureka moment on the dock. And that was, hey, we might have something here.
Hey, it's Frank. I think we found your golden nugget.
Item number 640 would give investigators a revealing glimpse into the past and lead them to conclude that the crash of Flight 611 actually began 22 years earlier.
Let's get as many pictures as we can.
The massive piece of fuselage that has caught Frank Zakar's attention is exactly what investigators have been searching for. It includes a piece of the belly, the sidewall, and the rear cargo door. It's from the back of the plane, precisely where the analysis told them the breakup had begun.
This piece of wreckage was highly unusual. It wasn't what we were seeing on all the other pieces, and it immediately drew our attention and drew the focus of the investigation.
The way most of the metal is torn suggests it ripped apart violently in mid-air.
Aerodynamically, as an airplane's moving through the air, if it were to break apart, just the force of the incoming air at over 500 miles per hour will just break up perfectly good structure. That's what we call an overload fracture. So most of the pieces that came up early were just indicative of that kind of overload.
When metal breaks due to overload or overstress, it comes apart at an angle. But the fractured edges of piece number 640 aren't angled, they're flat.
What do you think?
It's definitely not overstress. It's metal fatigue.
Fatigue fractures happen when metal is stressed repeatedly over time until it breaks. It looks very different from a stress fracture.
Typically, a metal fatigue crack will have a flat appearance. It'll be very smooth.
That's exactly the kind of crack that investigators observe on piece number 640. That tells them it didn't break off the plane suddenly as it fell from the sky. This piece separated from the plane over time. Had it caused the deaths of 225 people?
There was much more work that needed to be done. A detailed analysis of the piece had to be done in order to see if this in fact was the smoking gun.
There's something else about this piece that stands out. It has a metal patch on it. It's called a doubler plate. It's the equivalent of a patch on a punctured tire. It's not unusual to find numerous doubler plates on older planes like this one.
A doubler plate is like a patch that you put over fuselage skin. If there were to be a tear or a blemish, a crack identified, you'd want to repair the fuselage back to its original strength, and one way to do that is to put a doubler plate or a patch right over the existing structure.
At some point, this section of the 747 had been repaired. Investigators need to know why it was fixed and how that was done.
We're looking for repair to the aft lower lobe. Whatever it was big.
Investigators sift through 22 years of documents. But the records are sketchy. Finding details on one particular repair could take time. There's something about this particular doubler that catches Frank Zakar's attention.
The outside of the fuselage contained longitudinal streaks that appeared to emanate from between the doubler plate and the skin.
Something is leaking from underneath the metal patch.
Was there a possibility that the skin had broken, cracked, and was there any fuel or air coming out from between the doubler and the fuselage? And that warranted further examination.
Let's cut it from here to here and send this piece to Chongshan.
In order to see what's underneath the doubler, a large section of piece 640 is sent to a lab. No evidence has been found of structural or mechanical problems with Boeing's 747-200 airplanes. Taiwanese aviation officials have no reason to keep the planes on the ground. The Chongshan Institute of Science and Technology is a military research facility. It's at the forefront of Taiwan's space program. This is where investigators take a section of piece number 640 for a closer examination. The NTSB's Frank Zakar finds a telling clue on the crack itself.
When I looked at the fracture surface, I found that this one specific area was covered with aluminum oxide, pretty much similar to rust on a car.
Years of exposure to oxygen changes the color of metal. The discoloration tells investigators that this particular crack at the rear of the airplane has been there for a very long time. Then, when the doubler is finally removed, investigators get a look at the aluminium skin underneath. They're intrigued by what they see.
When we disassembled the doubler plate from the skin, we noticed that there were some fairly long gouge marks.
This is beyond the kind of damage a doubler is meant to patch.
That was an aha moment that we might have something here.
The search of the plane's documents also pays off. The records contain a very short reference to a mishap 22 years earlier, when this plane was only 6 months old.
Speed is low, sir. Watch it.
Its tail scraped the runway while landing.
Did you feel that?
It happens when a plane lands or takes off at too steep an angle. It's called a tail strike.
Dynasty 009, Hong Kong Tower. We observed smoke and sparks from your tail on landing.
Roger, Hong Kong Tower. We'll have that looked at. Tail strike, sir. I better log that.
It is a relatively common occurrence. It's not a good thing. Some airplanes even have what's called a bumper in that portion of the aft fuselage, so that if the tail ever does get too close to the ground, instead of sacrificing skin from the fuselage, you might have this sacrificial bumper that will take that wear.
Tail strike damage is routinely repaired. Investigators want to know how China Airlines went about fixing the plane. They can only find a brief mention of the repairs that were done in the plane's logbook.
That's all there is?
That's all we could find.
There's not a lot of detail in China Airlines records.
China Airlines indicating they could not find any of those documents. And when we started looking for it, we could not find any. And they said they probably got lost.
The documents that do exist show that the day after the tail strike, China Airlines did a temporary repair. Workers attached a large aluminium plate over the damaged area.
What do we know about the permanent repair?
It doesn't get much better.
A more permanent repair was to be carried out within 4 months.
This is what we got.
The maintenance records indicated that the permanent repair was done in accordance with Boeing recommendations in their structural repair manual. Evidence that we uncovered indicate that the repair was not done per the Boeing repair manual.
According to the manual, many of the scratches on the plane were too deep to be repaired. The entire damaged section should have been cut out and replaced.
You have to follow certain procedures, and the Boeing structural repair manual indicating very clearly what you should do step by step.
22 years later, investigators can tell that for some reason the damaged piece was not replaced. The scratches from the tail strike are still there. China Airlines engineers tell investigators that the scratched area was too large to cut out, so they sanded the scratches down instead.
In the event of scratching, it depends on how deep the scratches are. If they're not very deep, they can be blended out. But if the scratches are too deep, the repair technique that's called for is to actually cut out all of the scratched material and then design a doubler patch that's larger by a big percentage of the structure that was originally removed.
The scratches weren't sanded down or cut out. They're still there. Maintenance workers then made one final mistake.
They put the doubler plate right over the scratched material. The doubler plate that they put on was not 30% larger than the affected area. In fact, it was barely, maybe not even in certain locations, larger than the area that was scratched.
Even though the repair wasn't done according to Boeing's instructions, the way it was logged made it seem like it was. So for 22 years, anyone reading that entry would assume the damaged area had been cut out as it should have been.
Pieces were really starting to fall into place now. Once we saw this piece of structure that had the fatigue cracks in it, and we realized that it came from a structural repair that was not done properly, that was left to fly for 20 years.
Airborne passing 1,600.
Things began to make sense.
By covering an improper repair with a doubler and then documenting the repair as meeting Boeing standards, the workers made their mistake impossible to detect.
What was so insidious about this improper repair was that the doubler plate hid all of the damage. So if you weren't there watching them do this repair improperly, you wouldn't know that it was done improperly. You would have assumed that the structure underneath had been cut out the way it was supposed to.
And every time the plane took off over the next 20 years, the concealed problem got worse and worse. The air inside a commercial airplane is pressurized. As the plane climbs, air is forced into the cabin to keep the pressure inside the plane greater than the pressure outside. It's like inflating a tire. The inside air pushes against the plane's skin.
Each time the airplane pressurizes, pressure builds up inside the fuselage of the airplane. That crack could open up for a certain amount of inches or microns or millimeters.
The plane's skin expanded and contracted a little bit every time. Because they weren't properly repaired, the cracks grew and spread. Eventually, the crack grew into a stunning 2.3 meters.
If you were charting the crack, you would have seen very slow growth early, but as time went on, the growth was getting bigger and bigger.
A small scratch had grown into an enormous problem. Then in May 2002, as Flight 611 climbed, that problem killed 225 people.
As the airplane climbed in altitude and the fuselage was pressured, that put enough strain on this growing crack that it reached its critical length. And from there, it just spread like a spider web. It went in all directions, and it probably looped all the way around the fuselage to the point where the entire aft section of the airplane just broke off from the rest of the structure.
The plane went into a steep dive. The force of the air on what was left of the plane quickly ripped it to pieces. Investigators know that an unseen crack caused Flight 611 to break apart. They now discover that China Airlines came heartbreakingly close to finding that crack and saving 225 lives. The China Airlines 747 was in regular service for 22 years following the improper repair to its skin. It took off and landed more than 20,000 times. Over the years, mechanics would have scrutinized the plane.
There's regular inspections per the Boeing maintenance program that have to be performed on the airplane.
But the massive crack forming at the rear of the plane was never detected. Another accident in another country almost led China Airlines to discover the hidden damage. In 1988, the roof peeled off an aging Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines. As a result of that incident, the Federal Aviation Administration laid out an inspection procedure for older planes. Airlines around the world were forced to inspect their planes much more diligently for corrosion and cracks. The regulation called for airlines to reevaluate all existing repairs to a plane's structure.
Indications on this airplane were that if they had looked at the maintenance records and compared it to the repair, they would have had to remove the repair and redo it.
China Airlines took the first steps of the new procedure in 2001, a year before the accident. The airline identified and photographed 31 different doublers on the 747, including the one over the catastrophic crack. Those pictures show investigators that China Airlines overlooked a vital clue that could have warned them of the looming danger.
We examined the photographs that China Airlines took of the repair and noticed that there was some issues that may have warranted further investigation.
Investigators see a dark brown stain on the outside of the plane. It's the same mysterious staining that led Frank Zakar to suspect there was a hole behind the doubler when he first saw it on the pier. So why hadn't this stain raised alarms before the crash? For years, passengers on China Airlines' doomed 747 were allowed to smoke. They filled the pressurized air with nicotine. The smoke was being forced out through the crack at the rear of the plane. Over time, that smoke left a nicotine stain on the outside of the plane.
It was very vivid. Any experienced maintenance engineer be able to spot it right immediately.
Smoking hadn't been allowed on China Airlines for 7 years before the crash. It tells investigators that the crack in the plane had been there for at least that long. But instead of investigating the source of the staining,
we need to conduct the new inspection when we do our next major check.
China Airlines scheduled the second part of the FAA's procedure, a detailed inspection of the repaired areas.
And that would be the 7C check, currently scheduled for November the 2nd, 2002.
But the 747 never made it to November 2nd, 2002. It came apart over the Taiwan Strait 5 months before the inspection that would have undoubtedly uncovered its hidden flaw. Investigators want to prevent a similar accident from ever happening again. They recommend that aviation agencies around the world immediately inspect repairs for any possible hidden damage.
We were no longer going to accept just a quick write-up that the repair was done properly. If the repair didn't have all the necessary documentation to allow us to know it was done properly, we were requiring operators to take doubler plates off and do a visual inspection of the structure underneath.
The National Transportation Safety Board issues its own recommendations. The board asks that maintenance personnel be warned of the consequences of hiding the kind of damage that could lead to the structural failure of an airplane.
The moral of this story is that the repair has to be done properly. As a mechanic, when you're doing work on an airplane, you're not thinking about the people who might be flying on that fuselage 20 years from now, but their safety depends on you doing the repair properly.
China Airlines has revised the way its fleet is inspected and maintained. Its safety record has improved dramatically since the crash of Flight 611. Investigators also proposed the development of new tools that would allow mechanics to detect damage behind a doubler. Such tools are being used today.
Boeing developed a non-destructive procedure that can find cracks in the fuselage underneath the doubler.
That device uses ultrasound, sound waves that travel through metal. It can reveal damage underneath a doubler. It's the same technology that allows doctors to observe a fetus while it's still inside the womb. The device would have been able to detect the crack behind Flight 611's doubler plate. But the technology has some limitations.
A great number of hours are required just to do one specific area of the airplane, but the technology is getting better.
The problems that led to the China Airlines disaster are not going away. Planes the world over are getting older. And older planes need to be more thoroughly inspected for cracks. 6 years after the China Airlines crash, Southwest Airlines in the United States was hit with a record-breaking fine. $10.2 million for missing inspections designed to find cracks.
The finding of Southwest brings back into focus how important it is to do maintenance properly on an airplane.
A proper program of maintenance and inspections can be costly. But as China Airlines showed, the price of not maintaining aging planes is even costlier.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
To turn that off for now, sir. Thank you.
Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 is preparing to land in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
The crew is flying a state-of-the-art Boeing 737.
Flaps 15.
Localizer alive, localizer captured.
In the final moments of the flight, the landing turns into a catastrophe. The plane falls like a rock. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 involves the most popular plane on Earth. With nearly 1.5 million passengers boarding 737s every day, investigators need to figure out if the problem was with the plane or with the pilots flying it.
Mayday, Mayday.
On the morning of February the 25th, 2009, Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 becomes the first plane to crash at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in more than 10 years.
It smashed into the ground really hard. It made a tremendous noise.
The plane hits the ground in a muddy field just north of runway 18 right. Since the crash was so close to the airport, rescue workers arrive quickly. Most of the passengers have survived, but many are badly injured. Survivors are taken straight to local hospitals. Images of the Amsterdam accident quickly spread around the world. This is the third crash of a passenger jet in the past 6 weeks. The sudden nature of this accident adds to the mystery. It doesn't take long for the Dutch safety board to arrive at the scene. They will be investigating this accident, but they won't be alone. The crash involved an American-made plane, so the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board sends Joe Sador, one of its most experienced investigators, to Amsterdam.
When it's a non-U.S. registered aircraft that crashes overseas, such as this Turkish Airlines, we are the state of manufacture and design of the airframe, and also, in this case, the engines.
Fuselage in 3 large pieces, engines forward of the main wreck site.
Flight 1951 was one of the most advanced aircraft in the skies, the Boeing 737-800 series. It's designed to travel longer routes at higher altitudes.
The new generation 737 is still the best airplane Boeing ever built. We developed an airplane that had an improved wing, improved avionics, simpler systems that required less maintenance.
Investigators know this isn't just any plane. The 737 is the world's best-selling commercial jet. Finding out why this one crashed is imperative. There are more than 5,000 of them in the skies. They carry about 1.5 million passengers a day. Investigators must quickly determine if there's a flaw with the plane that could cause another accident. What they know so far is that Flight 1951 had been traveling from Istanbul, Turkey, to Amsterdam. There were 128 passengers on board the early morning flight, including 4 engineers from Boeing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Please raise your seat backs to the upright position and stow away your tray tables.
There was no mention on board of any kind of trouble in the cockpit. the crash has killed 9 people, including 3 members of the Boeing team and the pilots in the cockpit.
See if you can get me some aerials of the crash site.
There are eerie similarities to another recent accident involving a Boeing aircraft, British Airways Flight 38.
Approximately a year before this, there had been a 777 short landing at Heathrow, which had a dual-engine flameout.
In that accident, a Boeing 777 fell to the ground short of the runway. The British Airways pilots reported that both their engines stopped delivering power just before landing. At the time of the Turkish Airways crash, the cause of that accident hasn't been found. Like in that case, investigators have plenty of clues to work with. The plane and its engines are largely intact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are found in good condition. There are also plenty of survivors to describe what happened. According to the passengers, the landing had been routine, but then suddenly the plane simply dropped out of the sky and hit the ground. But perhaps the biggest clue comes from the crash site itself. The wreckage is not spread out. It tells investigators that the plane could not have been traveling forward at high speed when it hit the ground.
The way the aircraft had crashed, it did appear to be some sort of a landing accident in which there was moderate control of some sort.
The pattern of debris and the passenger reports point investigators to an immediate suspect: the engines.
The engines issue was a very big issue in my thought process at the time, initially.
There's no evidence of fire on the fuselage. In many crashes, fuel in the plane's tanks ignites on impact. The lack of fire raises an obvious question. Did the engines stop running because Flight 1951 had simply run out of gas?
That was one of the first thoughts that I had was, did this airplane have fuel aboard? Because otherwise, how does a 737 literally fall out of the sky on approach to an airport?
But the location and condition of the plane's engines suggest that perhaps they didn't quit in flight.
Sure looks like it was running.
When we first looked at where the engines ended up, the initial impression was that they probably were producing thrust at impact, given that they were so far forward of the main wreckage. That was just a very general conclusion.
Only the flight data recorder can tell investigators how much power the engines were generating in the seconds before the crash.
Lots of fuel. Rules that out.
It doesn't take long to discover that there was plenty of fuel in the plane's tanks. Flight 1951 definitely did not run out of gas. Passengers report that in the final seconds before the crash, the plane hit what felt like turbulence. It points investigators to a well-known culprit, a microburst. A microburst is a powerful column of air that shoots out of storm clouds. It can literally slam a low-flying plane to the ground.
If an airplane flies into that at approach speeds, you're not going to be flying anymore. You're going to come out of the sky. Certainly, it was one of the things that all of us took a look at the beginning. Was there a microburst?
In 1985, a Delta Airlines flight was caught in a microburst while landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The plane hit the ground short of the runway. 137 people were killed. Investigators learned that there were heavy clouds above the airport at the time of the accident. A powerful gust of wind may well have accompanied them. The flight data recorder will have recorded wind speeds outside the plane. Investigators will need to analyze the flight data to prove the microburst theory. In the meantime, the rescue has led to an unusual discovery.
There was 3 pilots in the cockpit, which is unusual. This is a 2-crew cockpit. So why was that 3rd pilot there?
Since none of the 3 pilots survived the accident, it's all the more urgent for investigators to retrieve the data from the cockpit voice recorder. It records conversations in the cockpit. They're in luck.
Because of the way that the aircraft crashed, access to the recorders and the condition of the recorders was excellent.
The reason for the 3rd pilot is soon uncovered.
Flying standard arrival route
Visibility 3,500 meters, expected to decrease to 2,500 meters.
For First Officer Murat Sezer, this had been a training flight of sorts. He was new to the airline and was being shown the intricacies of landing at Amsterdam's airport.
In the Jepson charts, which is what all pilots use to navigate to and from Schiphol, there's 102 pages of information on Schiphol alone. So there's dozens of approaches.
Runway 18 right has 3 high-speed exits to the left.
The captain, Hassan Arisan, was doing double duty. He was training his first officer.
Make small corrections as we get close to the runway.
And was in command of Flight 1951. It's because Captain Arisan was teaching that there was the third pilot in the cockpit. Olgay Ozgur was a safety pilot. He was there to keep an eye on the flight's progress during this training mission.
The purpose of that second set of eyes is to make sure that the captain and the first officer, if they're in a situation where it's a little bit of a training portion of the flight, that they don't miss something.
We got a clean recording?
The voice recorder reveals that the 3 crew members began preparations for landing when still above 8,500 feet.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
But the voice recorder has picked up an unusual sound, a warning that makes no sense at this stage of the flight.
One of the investigators from Boeing was a engineering pilot that came and helped with the CVR. And he's listening to see when, or are there any unusual sounds that can be heard that would not be normal.
Speed okay for ILS 18 right. Descent 4,000, ILS 18 right.
The alarm keeps sounding. It's the landing gear configuration warning horn. Captain Arisan continually dismisses it.
Turkish 1951, descent 4,000, ILS 18 right. Landing gear.
Is that the landing gear warning? They're at 8,300 feet here.
The warning is a solid clue, but investigators can't yet see how it could possibly have caused a crash. The crew of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 got warnings to extend their landing gear while still thousands of feet in the air.
On the initial listen, we heard a gear warning horn occur as the aircraft was approaching, when it was still up and it was coming in about 10,000 feet and below.
Investigators now turn to the flight data recorder to help solve some of the mystery surrounding this flight. The analysis of wind speeds outside the aircraft is completed. It's clear, none are drastic enough to have brought down the plane.
Evidence of a microburst.
But the flight data recorder does provide some valuable insight into the cause of the landing gear warning. One of the instruments that measures altitude had the plane already on the ground.
When we looked and saw the radio altimeter data, on the recorder it showed about 8,000 feet, and then immediately it went down to about -8. -8 feet is an indication that the aircraft's on the ground, but of course it's still at 2,000 feet.
The Boeing 737 is equipped with 2 separate altimeters. One measures air pressure to determine the plane's height above sea level. That reading is displayed prominently in the cockpit on both pilots' flight display.
10, set, sir.
The plane is also equipped with a radio altimeter. It's made up of 4 antennas. 2 transmit signals to the ground, and 2 others read the signal that bounces back to determine the plane's height.
It's precise. It's very, very precise. Pressure altimeters can sometimes be not as accurate, and radar altimeters are 100% accurate if they're working properly.
One antenna feeds the reading to the first officer's display. The other feeds the captain's instruments. In the case of Flight 1951, the captain's side was wrong most of the flight. Investigators go back over the CVR and make a puzzling discovery.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250. Radio altimeter.
Captain Arasan seems to have known that the landing gear warning was being caused by a faulty radio altimeter.
The airplane thought that it was low to the ground and the gear was not down. And the captain recognized that the problem was really in the radio altimeter, showing him that they should be on the ground, and he goes, it's just the radio altimeter.
Throughout much of the approach, the captain's radio altimeter had been displaying a reading of -8 feet, triggering the warning to lower the gear.
They treated it like it was a nuisance.
Turkish 1951. Descend to 2000.
2000, 1951.
Investigators dig for any other abnormalities. They learn that with Flight 1951 still about 17 kilometers from the airport, controllers directed the pilots to begin their final turn to line up with the runway.
Turkish 1951. Left heading 210. Cleared approach. 18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
210 set, sir.
This turn puts Flight 1951 in line with runway 18 right. It's equipped with an instrument landing system, which sends out a signal outlining the ideal descent path to the foot of the runway. The autopilot follows that glide path until the plane is a few hundred feet from the ground. Then the pilot takes over. It makes landing almost effortless.
The ILS is pretty easy to follow. It's a video game. My daughter has flown in a simulator and can land a 737 using the ILS.
The crew begins configuring their plane for landing, unfazed by the warning horn that's repeatedly triggered by the malfunctioning radio altimeter.
Flaps 15.
10 kilometers out, Flight 1951 picks up the ILS signal that will guide the plane to the runway.
Localizer alive. Localizer capture.
The safety pilot, Olgay Ojgur, now reminds Captain Arasan about the failed altimeter.
We have radio altimeter failure, sir.
Okay.
Turkish 1951. Runway 18 right. Clear to land.
Clear to land, thank you.
Investigators are stumped. The crew knew about the malfunction and continued their approach. How had it then caused them to crash? Clearly, there was more to this accident than a faulty altimeter.
The whole premise of airline safety, the way we build the airplanes, the way we fly them, is based on the idea that we can have any number of failures and we should still be able to arrive safely. The radio altimeter is just one instrument. There's no way in the world that that one instrument, if it fails, should be a major cause of worry that we're going to have a crash.
Investigators wonder if the crew had been given proper guidance for their approach. They turn to exchanges between the pilots and the controller who guided them in. They carefully review every instruction.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4000. Speed okay for ILS 18 right. Turkish 1951, descend to 2000. Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18 right.
By following the controller's instructions, the crew made their final turn much too close to the runway.
So to intercept properly, they should be here.
International guidelines call for approaching planes to intercept the signal that guides them to the runway from below. It's so pilots don't have to make any drastic last-minute course corrections to get to it.
To intercept here, they had to descend.
But Flight 1951 was given instructions that brought it to the threshold of the glide slope while still way above it. It's a common practice at Schiphol because it gets planes to the runway faster.
Because they were so close, they had to capture the glide slope from above. Although it is an unusual situation, it is one that can be handled by a flight crew if it is managed properly.
Approaching a glide slope from above is more difficult, mostly because the crew has to suddenly slow the plane and descend rapidly to intercept the signal.
We also call this a slam dunk approach, and some pilots like it, some pilots don't. It's a little bit harder, and things happen quicker when you're above the glide path trying to intercept from above, and it's just a challenge for a lot of pilots.
The approach from above increased the crew's workload, but it's standard practice at Schiphol Airport.
I've flown into Schiphol dozens of times, and I expect it.
If the controller's instructions had somehow overtaxed this crew, their conversations would indicate it. They're just 5 kilometers from the runway.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40. Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
500.
All lights on.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew, take your seats.
Then, real trouble. A stall warning.
Speed, sir.
I have control.
100 knots of speed.
Arisan fought to save his plane, but just 400 feet above the ground and only 1.5 kilometers from the runway, the Boeing 737 suddenly fell straight down. It only took a few seconds for it to hit the ground.
Turkish 1951.
The recording sheds light on the final minutes of the flight. The crew was configuring their plane for landing well after it should have been done.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
Most airlines have regulations that call for a flight to be stabilized, to have all checklists completed by the time the plane hits 1,000 feet.
In instrument conditions, you're required at 1,000 feet to have basically everything done. The airplane is configured, you have slowed, you have run your before landing check, and you have received your landing clearance. And from 1,000 feet on in, you just monitor the instruments, and we're looking for the runway.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew.
In fact, this crew was still running their checklist up to the moment the crisis hit, 460 feet above the ground.
This approach was not stabilized.
Because the aircraft was unstable, the flight crew was in a very high workload environment in the last 1,000 feet of flight.
The radio altimeter was malfunctioning. The aircraft was giving off warnings. The crew was assigned a challenging approach, and they were executing a checklist late. But none of this explains why Flight 1951 crashed.
In these type of accidents, you can never get inside the head of the pilots. And that's a very frustrating type of accident.
But the flight data recorder does provide another intriguing clue. Moments before Flight 1951 hit the ground, the plane's engines were at idle, hardly providing any power. Perhaps this accident is a repeat of the Heathrow incident.
The engines, it was interesting to note, were at idle approximately the last 2 minutes of the flight, until the very end when the thrust was increased again. That was a big red flag right there. The question is why was that the case?
But then they spot something that's very different from the accident at Heathrow.
Retard flare mode.
For some reason, while still more than 1,000 feet above the ground, the plane's computer began preparing to touch down. In retard flare mode, engine power is reduced to idle by the flight computer, and the plane's nose automatically pitches up to the flare position. Planes should only be in this configuration just before they touch the ground.
The autopilot raises the nose to break the descent. The autothrottles brings the power back to flight idle, and you touch down with the power either all the way in idle or just about to be in idle.
But Flight 1951 went into a slow, nose-up position well before touchdown, causing the plane to fly slower and slower throughout its descent. So why was Flight 1951 in landing mode? And why hadn't any of the 3 crew members noticed how slowly they were flying?
So, what else was going on when the engines went to idle?
The trouble seems to start with the malfunctioning altimeter.
We had to look at the system as a whole and see how that -8 affected the other systems on the aircraft. And that was a very big portion of this investigation. We had to say, how did the autopilot use that data? More importantly, how did the auto throttle use that data?
The computer that flies the plane consists of two main systems, the autopilot and the auto throttle. The auto throttle determines how much power to ask the engines for, while the autopilot controls the plane's altitude and direction. The two systems work independently of each other, and only one of the radio altimeters provides information to the auto throttle.
In this case, I had to learn everything there was about radio altimeters and auto throttle systems, which I didn't know before.
The pieces of the puzzle begin coming together when they find the connection between the faulty radio altimeter and engine power.
The radio altimeter provides information to the auto throttle from the captain's side.
The only altimeter feeding information to the auto throttle was the captain's, and it was wrong. It showed -8 feet throughout most of Flight 1951's approach. It's beginning to look like the faulty radio altimeter triggered the events that led to the crash. Investigators need to know what went wrong with it. On a 737, the transmitting and receiving antennas for both radio altimeters are lined up underneath the cockpit. 3 of the antennas were all but destroyed in the crash. They can't be tested. But one antenna from the captain's side is undamaged. Investigators consider 2 possibilities: a failure of one of the components, or some sort of interference that caused the faulty reading. The only component that survived the crash checks out. The computers that control the system also work. But investigators do make a curious discovery about them. They aren't the same ones that were installed on the plane when it was delivered to Turkish Airlines 7 years ago. This find changes the focus of the investigation.
The maintenance aspect of this accident aircraft was one that we looked at as deeply as we could.
When the plane's maintenance log is studied, investigators find that the radio altimeter on this plane had a problematic history.
We got additional data from Turkish Airlines, and that data showed that on this one aircraft, of the past, I believe, over 1,000 flights, there was about 150 flights that had faulty radio altimeter systems.
The documents show that a little more than a year before the crash, both computers were replaced because of complaints they were causing faulty readings. One of the incidents involved a radio altimeter reading of -8 feet.
So that was telling us that there was an issue that had been there. The issue did not just occur on this flight.
The faulty readings persisted. Mechanics repeatedly swapped the computers and replaced the antennas to try to solve the problem. It's determined that Turkish Airlines tried several ways to fix the altimeter, but they couldn't find a repair that worked. At the time of the accident, Turkish Airlines had a fleet of 52 Boeing 737-800 series airplanes.
It's on page 93.
When we reviewed the maintenance data, we found that radio altimeter problems had been written up several times on both the accident airplane and the fleet.
Investigators discover that in the year before the crash, Turkish Airlines dealt with 235 system faults with the radio altimeters on their 737s. Fixes ranged from replacing and exchanging antennas, cleaning of the systems, exchanging and replacing the computers, and installing gaskets to shield the system from possible water damage.
It's not like they weren't doing anything about it.
The Turkish Airlines maintenance personnel knew that the radio altimeter problem was one of their highest issues with regard to maintenance.
16 of those altimeter repairs were made to the plane that crashed in February 2009. If the problem was so widespread, investigators wonder why it hadn't caused serious problems before this accident. They don't have to dig too far back to find out that in fact it had, on this very same plane.
On 2 recent flights, they had the exact same problem.
Twice in the 48 hours leading up to the accident, the radio altimeter showed a negative reading, putting the plane into retard flare mode. Both times the crew noticed the problem, disengaged the auto throttles, and brought the plane in for a safe landing.
You just disconnect it and fly the airplane.
In the months after the crash, other operators come forward with similar stories. In Australia, in the Netherlands, in Canada, in Austria, pilots report their 737s going into retard flare mode when the left radio altimeter showed a faulty reading. Each of those crews reacted the same way. They disengaged the auto throttle and pushed the power back up manually. They all landed safely.
Things are going to break on an airplane, and usually you're able to identify that and take that out of, make it so that it's not a threat for the landing.
In 2008, Boeing received a whopping 2,569 reports of faulty radio altimeters on their latest 737s. But very few of those cases involved the plane going into retard flare mode.
Hardly any reports at all.
Boeing also tried but couldn't find the cause of the failures. They concluded that the radio altimeter problem was not a threat to safety because the 737 gives off enough warnings so that crews can intervene and land safely. In fact, in every instance where the radio altimeter failed, crews were able to recover. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 seems to be the one exception. Investigators still don't know why.
It really got us wondering of what happened. And that's when we started to look really closely at the actions of the flight crews while it was on that final approach in less than 1,000 feet.
Finally, as investigators again revisit the last minutes of Flight 1951, the circumstances of the tragedy become clear. They see a remarkable sequence of events that transpire to bring down this plane.
So, what was happening when the plane went into retard flare mode?
They discover that the plane went into landing mode and pulled back power at the worst possible moment, exactly as the crew was descending to meet the glide slope.
It masked what was actually happening.
As the crew configured their plane to drop down to meet the glide slope, they expected the plane to slow down as part of that maneuver. But the plane was actually slowing down because the computer was in landing mode. That's why none of the 3 pilots said anything about the throttles moving to idle.
It was insidious. Where it first captured in the retard mode, it didn't hurt them at all because they were actually high and they were a little bit fast. And the pilots actually wanted the power back anyway. In fact, the throttles may have already been in the flight idle mode as they were trying to get down and slow down.
The trouble starts here at 8,300 feet, 13 miles out from the airport, minutes before the crash.
Amsterdam. Turkish 1951, descending 7,000, speed 250.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 1 beat. Right.
Radio altimeter.
Would the crew have known that because of that radio altimeter they would have gone to a retard flare mode in the throttles? No.
It was a common problem at the airline, but the crew couldn't see the risk it posed this flight.
We have an airplane that was malfunctioning in a very minor way, but in a way that, if not caught, could and did metastasize into something much more virulent.
Turkish 1951, descent to 2000.
2000, 1951.
Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
Now left at 210 degrees, maintaining 2,000 feet, brings the flight in right here, 5.5 miles out. They now have to intercept the glide slope from above.
At 2,000 feet, with the glide slope below them, the pilots have to reduce their speed while descending steeply.
Speed 140.
They believe the throttles are moving back for the descent to the glide slope. In fact, the auto throttle is slowing the plane down because it's gone into landing mode. It will continue to slow the plane until it stalls.
What we found is that when the flight crew was doing their before landing checklist, each one of them was doing something while they should have been monitoring their airspeed.
For the next 100 seconds, no one notices what's happening. Until it's too late.
Established altitude set.
1000.
Check.
Flaps 40.
Speed set.
The experienced pilot recognized that the first officer was probably a little bit behind on the approach, so he calls for flaps 40 and moves the lever, informing the first officer that he has done so. He's trying to help the first officer catch up to the position of the aircraft.
Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
The plane is now 700 feet from the ground.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
In their haste to complete their checklist, none of the 3 crew members noticed the warnings that their speed is dropping dangerously. First, a red bar appeared on their flight display. Then, when the airspeed continued to drop, a flashing box appeared around their actual airspeed to draw the pilot's attention to it. At this point, no one sees either.
Cabin report confirmed.
The aircraft is now 600 feet from landing.
When things start changing colors, it's a warning to you, it's a caution to you that you're approaching the limits of the aircraft.
Missed approach. Altitude set.
500.
So all of these indications the crew has in front of them saying that the aircraft is slowing down. During that time, they were still completing their checklist.
Of course, the aircraft is getting closer to the ground.
In fact, it's less than 500 feet from touchdown.
And right before the stick shaker started, the captain told the safety pilot,
"Please warn the cabin crew."
Cabin crew, take your seats. Speed, sir.
I have control.
By the time they advanced the throttles to full power, it was unrecoverable. They were too low for the engines to catch up.
And that's it. It's now too late to save this plane. They all knew about the altimeter problem, but knowing didn't help.
Boeing also didn't foresee the potentially deadly effect of a faulty altimeter. But on February the 25th, 2009, it triggered an unusual sequence of events that brought down a jetliner and killed 9 people. The official report into the accident blames it on a convergence of circumstances.
There is never, ever just one cause to an airline accident. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe someday God will swap one out of the sky, but until then, there's never one cause.
The Dutch report also points out that Boeing could have realized the problem with the radio altimeter system could have had an impact on safety. Given that no one foresaw how that failure might cause a crash, the Turkish Airlines accident raises a big question. Are airplanes becoming too complex? Investigators have determined that Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 crashed mainly because the pilots didn't recognize the consequences of the warnings they were getting.
Turkish 1951, descent to 4000.
This is not the first plane to crash because the crew didn't understand what their plane was telling them.
Turkish.
Our problem is not the automation. Our problem is the depth of the training and the ability of the human beings to recover from mistakes made in interfacing with the automation.
Mika Ensley studies the relationship between pilots and technology.
We haven't really designed the automation to take best advantage of what people do well and take away the parts that people don't do well.
In 1996, the crew of an Aero Peru 757 crashed when the pilots couldn't decipher contradictory warnings about their altitude and airspeed. The plane flew into the Pacific Ocean. 61 passengers and 9 crew members were killed. In 1995, the flight management system on a Boeing 757 could and should have steered the plane to a safe landing in Cali, Colombia. But a last-minute change to the flight plan meant the crew had to reprogram their computer. They mistakenly entered a course that took them headlong into a 9,000-foot mountain. 159 people died in the crash.
The cautionary tale here is that we can get this equipment, we can get these silicon-based units, if you will, so sophisticated that we can't talk to them effectively. And when they go berserk, or they have a problem, or we misprogram them, we end up putting ourselves and our passengers in danger while we're trying to figure it out.
NASA is working on something called the Integrated Intelligent Flight Deck. It's a project aimed at helping humans better use the technology that surrounds them in the cockpit.
They're looking at automated flight manual systems, voice recognition systems. They've developed new kinds of microphones that are bone-conducting chips. They're developing new displays for understanding the ground environment, for being able to detect where other aircraft are in the environment.
What some researchers are finding is that the best technology shouldn't replace pilots, but work with them.
Really integrating people with technology more effectively has to do with designing the displays so that you can really understand what it's doing, and you can make it simpler to understand how to make it do what it is you want it to do. You shouldn't have to push 16 buttons through 8 levels of menus to figure out what's going on with the system. It should be integrated and presented effectively. It should be as easy to communicate with as the person next to you.
Boeing and Airbus, the 2 largest manufacturers of passenger planes, take very different approaches to the relationship between humans and technology. Airbus gives the flight computer much of the decision-making power in the cockpit.
In their view, this is a way to prevent a lot of human errors by making sure the airplane doesn't do something that's going to cause a crash, even if the humans want it to.
But Boeing has a different view. Its philosophy is to provide information to pilots and have them make decisions.
Having more information is better for the pilot, having the pilot in the loop, in the equation, so to speak. I kind of like that.
Airbus will argue vociferously and in continuous fashion that view is archaic and incorrect. I think the jury is still out.
The final report into the Turkish Airlines tragedy blames the crash of Flight 1951 partly on a failure of technology.
The erroneous radio altimeter data caused the autothrottle to go to an improper mode that is, of course, not a good situation.
The cause of the radio altimeter failure was never uncovered. The Dutch investigation asks Boeing to improve the reliability of the system.
We learned a lot about the radio altimeter system and how it affects the autothrottle system. Boeing is currently working on system improvements to prevent this type of autothrottle event from occurring again.
But the report also faults the crew for not noticing that their airspeed was dropping dangerously low, in spite of the fact that there were 3 pilots on board.
Forget that you got an autothrottle. You look at the airspeed, and you look at the altitude. You look out the damn window if you want to, but airspeed is a crucial component of staying alive in an airplane. And you always need to know what your airspeed is.
But to Mika Ensley, the crew's failure to monitor instruments is entirely understandable and may be more the fault of the instruments than the crew.
It's actually very difficult for people to be monitors of automation. One of the things that people don't do a good job of actually is monitoring. We're very good on-the-spot decision makers. We're very good at coming up with creative solutions to problems, but repetitive monitoring is the kind of thing that actually people aren't very good at all. So what we have to do is design automation to work with people in a way that keeps them more actively, cognitively involved and in the loop, and not just monitoring a piece of automation to say, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Who's the ultimate computer? The pilot, the individual who should be able to say, I don't know what this thing is doing to me, but I'm punching it off and flying the airplane. Fly the jet. Probably the smartest thing we ever learned to say in our training in the airlines, fly the jet. Do that first or nothing else counts. That's what they forgot to do.